Welcome to the Georgia Association of Business Brokers monthly meeting for its March 30th, 2021. You take it away, Judy.
And our speaker this morning is Peter Goodman, who is president of the Massachusetts Business Brokers Association and has spent 15 years in the business brokerage industry. He operates out of the greater Boston, Massachusetts area, and he is going to talk about the all-important buyer-seller meeting. So take it away, Peter.
Okay, good. That was easy. In my meetings, I tend to sort of chit-chat for a while. We go over some things, but everybody does it differently, I guess. So I love that. I get to jump right into it. Okay, so good morning, everyone. Yeah, as she said, I'm Peter Goodman, and it's actually the New England Business Brokers Association. We've got, Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island in our group. And we have about 80 or 90 members. And anyway, we're doing our monthly meetings just like everybody else these days, for the most part, surviving COVID. And anyway, today, I have the pleasure of having my first tee time of the season. Up here in Massachusetts, we can't play golf in the winter. So that's why I get the golf stuff on, because I got to shoot to the golf course right after this is over, okay? But don't worry, I have until 11, so I'm good. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen. Okay, here we go. So today's talk is about managing the buyer-seller meeting or a seller-buyer meeting. I've given this talk so far. I think I've done the workshop in person at an IBBA conference. I did a virtual one. I've done it here for my association. And so I haven't done this in a while, but I'm happy to always pick up on this. This is just a great topic to discuss, in my opinion. And so much hinges on the buyer-seller meeting, as we all know. And I think if you've been in this business for a while, you've seen the successes and failures of what can happen in your meeting. And so the more we can kind of think about it and do it right, the better off we are. So hopefully I'll touch on some important points for you, okay? So again, this is my company, Goodman & Company Business Brokers, Sudbury, Mass, which is just west of Boston. And I do Main Street to lower mid-market. Sold a lot of businesses in my day, and that's me personally, not my associates. So I get out there, I sell them, and I'll sell anything personally from a pizza shop up to, I just sold a $4 million fire security business. So I do the whole range, and I like doing them all. So that's just how I run my business. Okay, so first thing important to know is that nothing I'm going to tell you in this webinar is absolute. Everybody has their own style. Everyone has their own opinions. And I'll once in a while get disagreements on how to go about this, and that's fine. And I think, hopefully like any other webinar like this that you're going to be involved in, you're going to get some good nuggets, right? And maybe you're not going to get everything I'm telling you, but you're going to get some good stuff that's going to help you in your business brokerage practice. And if you get a few good tips, that things you really put into practice that helps you sell businesses, this was not a waste of your time, I would say. So anyway, but everybody has common sense. Find the nuggets that will help you in your business brokerage practice. So seller-buyer meeting is a big deal, right? It can break your deal. It can make your deal. So we wanted to make the deal as much as possible. You want to be thoughtful about this step and really give it forethought before the meeting starts. Have the right elements in place so that when you finally have it, it goes well, right? And, and I edited this meeting, around this time last year, COVID-19 had hit. And so I added some COVID-19 things into the presentation because obviously that's affecting my meetings. I assume it's affecting everyone's meetings down there. And I think it's going to have a permanent effect as to the way we do things. Most people weren't using Zoom a lot before COVID. Now I assume you're all using it quite a bit. And so there's some tips too as to how you're going to make the Zoom meeting really work for you as well. But some of the things still remain the same. Anyway, if there's a COVID-19-ish comment or something related to doing it virtually, it's in blue. Okay. And by the way, if you have any questions, I don't know if you can put them in the chat, or maybe somebody will ask me the questions at the end. That might be best because I won't be able to read the chat as I go along. Okay, so objectives of the seller-buyer meeting. So first of all, it's for the seller and buyer to get to know each other, right? To establish trust, establish the beginnings of a working relationship. And once you make that deal and before, they've got to work together, right? So you're establishing the beginnings of that. It's a friendly meeting to talk about possibilities, instills the buyer with confidence and momentum. And it also instills the seller with confidence about the buyer. It's a two-way street. You're not just selling the business to the buyer's got to sell himself or herself to the seller as well. Everybody's got to, they need to jointly like each other in order for a deal to go through. It's hard if they dislike each other, it's hard to sell a business. Okay, and during this meeting, the buyer has the opportunity to ask unfiltered questions about the business, about the operations, the financials. That's a little tougher to do at the meeting if it involves looking at spreadsheets or detail on financial numbers. The reason for selling the business, the market for the business's products and services, employees, anything else that's of concern for the buyer. Objectives, some more objectives too. The seller can learn things about the buyer too at this meeting. So what is the reason for the buyer's purchase of the business? What is the buyer's background? Buyer's plans for the business? And this helps seller relate and respond to the buyer's questions and concerns. So we're going to go over sort of an agenda. I think that's in here. And I always start with the buyer, right? Saying, tell us about yourself and what is your background? What are your plans for the business? That way, when the seller's talking and responding to questions, they can understand, sort of know where the buyer's coming from more and sort of speak to what the buyer's plans are, right? A little bit better, okay? Also, if the buyer has a lot of experience in that industry, I mean, that's going to help the seller to know how in detail the seller can talk about the business. Okay, so what is the broker's role, okay? And this is obviously really important. Now we're talking about during the meeting, okay? So we're saying listening and learning more about the seller's business. I don't know about you, but I do a lot of pre-due diligence on sellers. And I really do a lot of work to create a nice marketing piece. I like to get in all the primary information about the business into my marketing piece, the CBR. And but there's always some things you don't quite catch, especially if you're new to the industry of the buyer's business, a seller's business, excuse me. There may be some things you never thought to bring up. And so in this meeting, more things inevitably come up than you had considered. That's my experience anyway. So you're listening and learning, watching and correcting misunderstandings. That's another big one too. Sometimes you've got a buyer asking a question and then the seller answers. And then you know that the seller didn't quite respond to what the buyer was getting at. And I want to make sure that the buyer's question is answered properly. So I might interrupt and say, you know, I think he or she meant this, and then try to rephrase the question in a way that'll get a correct response out of the seller. Okay, you're also listening for problems that arise so you can solve them, right? So in other words, buyer asks a question, seller wasn't sure or had sort of a shaky answer. And you'll want to, and you know that if that's sort of a nagging concern of the buyer, you've got to be able to follow up afterwards, after this meeting, and make sure that that issue is resolved. You got to go to the seller and say, hey, you know, you were asked this, but you didn't really answer it. Is there a problem there? And find out and then get back to the buyer, right? Okay, what's the best kind of buyer? Buyers that complain and ask lots of questions, right? They might be more difficult to deal with, but you know what they're thinking, you know what they need, and if the more you know what they need, the more you can solve their issues. So you're listening for problems that arise so you can solve them. Okay, and you're making sure that follow-up items are handled. So if the seller promises some information after the meeting, you got to make sure that the seller provides that. They can't just forget about it after the meeting. Seller may not have written it down, seller might forget. So anyway, you're gauging the buyer interest. Like I said, the best buyers are the ones that speak up. I always say to my sellers, the best buyers are a pain in the neck. Why? I say the tire kickers are easy to work with, right? They don't really make you do too much work. It's the ones that really make you do the work. They're the ones that are actually thinking of buying the business. So I always say that to the seller, because sometimes the sellers get annoyed if there's too many questions. I just say, listen, best buyers are the ones that are a pain in the neck, because they're the ones that actually want to buy your business. They're the ones that are doing the hard work. So, and while I'm in that meeting, I inevitably have my computer open and I'm taking notes during the meeting. So all these things I'm writing down, problems, I got to follow up items, things I want to say to the seller later about, maybe they didn't address something properly. Okay, more stuff. Patience is a virtue, right? So in this meeting, you got to be patient with your seller, because nobody's perfect, right? And sometimes people don't say the right thing, or you'd say, geez, I wish they didn't phrase it that way, or, be patient with them. They're doing their best. You're doing your best too. I don't know about you, but I've made mistakes on things I've said. I said, geez, I wish I didn't say that, right? Who hasn't been in that position? So nobody's perfect. Be patient with your seller. If you get frustrated with them, that's never going to help you, right? Seller isn't perfect, and neither are you. All right, tips for your seller. So here's the thing. You are the seller's coach. You got to coach your seller on this meeting. Do you all have meetings with the seller prior to the buyer meeting? And you go over a list of things to coach them about? You should be doing that. I definitely do that. And I have like about 10 points on a list that I go over with my seller in order to sort of set their head straight as to how they're supposed to behave in the meeting, and some things that need to be brought up. So, and we're going to go over those tips. Okay. So that's part of this meeting here. So and by the way, I expect that even though I have my list, you may have your list. Okay. Which may include some of the things that I'm thinking of, and it could include some things that I'm not thinking of. So everybody's got their own style. Anyway, the seller needs you to be their coach. That's one of the reasons they hired you. This is your job, okay? You got to coach the seller before the buyer-seller meeting. So the coaching session here. So you arrange to speak to the seller just prior to the meeting, okay? I don't have the talk several days before. They're going to forget the things you talk to them about. So if I've got a meeting like at noontime, I'll probably get the seller on the phone at 10 o'clock that morning. That's when I do the coaching. So it's really fresh in their mind. All right. And by the way, sometimes our businesses don't sell so quickly, and, you can be having these meetings for 6 months before you get a deal. Don't expect that your seller is going to remember all the pointers that you gave them at the beginning of the listing period. You have to have refresher meetings with them as well. Okay, so start with the nickel tour. That's what we see up here in Massachusetts. I don't know if in Georgia you say that. Okay. So you start with the tour of the business, okay? If meeting at the business. So I know that that's, obviously we're not doing that as much now. I'm doing my meetings virtually, unless I have a buyer who's really at the stage of either in due diligence or making an offer. I've got to do a follow-up with the seller and I want to bring them into the business. Everything's being done virtually. So coincidentally, just before COVID hit, I started doing videos of all my businesses. How many of you out there are doing a video of all your businesses? I highly recommend this. And so I'm going to talk to you about it right now. But before we get to that, that's the blue tips at the bottom. But anyway, you start with a tour of the business in a normal situation. As they go around, they should be going over the profit centers. So let's say you're in a retail store, and they should be, when they go to individual departments in the retail store, oh yeah, this thing right here, we only pay $3 for these and we sell them for $12. It's really profitable, right? Buyers, what do they want to hear about? They want to know about how the business makes money. No matter what else you're thinking about why your buyer wants to buy it, obviously the primary thing is making money. That's why they're buying the business. And as you take them around the business, you want to point out the profit centers and how does each profit center make money. That's really important. Another tip I put here is spiders not invited. Up here in Massachusetts, We have basements in almost all buildings, and most businesses store products in their basements. And I know you don't have that down there as much, but we have it up here because of the frost. But we don't want to get caught in sort of a dirty, dusty, lousy environment, and all of a sudden they start having this 30-minute meeting. Not a good idea. So I'll tell the seller ahead of time, if we get stuck in a bad part of your building, let's move the meeting along, and then we'll sit down later in your office or whatever it is to have our talk about the business. Okay. Anyway, virtual meeting tips. So I'm just going to tell you real quick, if you're not doing this, I strongly, strongly recommend it. It has really helped my practice, and it helps you to sell a business even without COVID. You should be doing this. And what I do is now is I don't know if I have time now, but I could really bring one up, I suppose. But I just go into the business. I use my iPhone, okay? Just an iPhone. I will take a video of the seller. Essentially, I'm like, think of yourself, you're on you've seen like the real estate programs on TV, and somebody's giving you a tour of a beautiful house or something, right? And it's sort of an interview. Someone is doing like an interview with that real estate agent as they're bringing you through the house. It's just like that. It's like you're on a TV show and you're bringing them through and you're asking questions and you're sort of leading the way. And what you do is you keep it upbeat, friendly, maybe a little bit humorous, a lot of smiling, and you basically just interview, have the seller essentially do a tour of the business, and you do it on video. And then here's the tip. Ready? It's so easy to do this. As long as I use Microsoft Office, okay? So there's a program that comes with Microsoft Office. It's called Video Editor, okay? You see Video Editor? So you'll find that program. You just suck in the video you took from your iPhone, and then what you do is you edit it. You add a couple of title screens saying tour of such and such a business. The next screen says listed by and who you are and your contact information. And then you go straight into that video, and you can even do a few different clips. You just join them together right in Video Editor. It's so simple. And then you just finish it off with a final title screen. And then what you do is you turn it into an MP4. Okay, Microsoft does all this for you. It's so easy. And then you all have a Google account, and you basically go into YouTube with your Google account, and you upload it to Google, and you can set the privacy right there, because obviously the listings are confidential. So you can make these private videos. So in other words, you have to give someone the link in order for them to be able to see the video. So these are not public links. And I'm telling you, you're going to love this, because now what you do is they've signed the NDA. You've sent them the marketing materials on the business. You've answered some questions. And now you also, with the marketing materials, though, you send them this video. And what's one of the greatest challenges that a business broker has in selling a business? And I know you all know this, but it might not come to you. And when I say it that way, but you've all been through this. First of all, you put the ad in Biz Buy Sell or wherever, you get them, you have to inspire them to click on the ad and ask for more information. Then you got to send them a non-disclosure agreement. You've got to inspire them to sign that non-disclosure agreement, right? Because they can get it and not even sign. We all know that. And then once they sign the NDA and you send them the marketing materials, you got to inspire them to read the marketing materials. How many people have called the buyer a week later and said, so what did you think of that business I sent you? And they say, oh, I've been kind of busy. I haven't really had a chance to open it up, right? So that's tough. You got to really move people along in the steps. We all know that as business brokers. So, but I will tell you, and like I said, eventually, then you get them to ask some questions, then you set up a meeting. It takes a lot to get them in that business. You want to sell a business, you got to bring that buyer into the business. And there is no easier way to bring your buyer into the business than to send them a video of the business right off the bat. You bring them right in there. They see how nice it is. They get to meet the seller. They see the insides of that business. They like what they see. I will tell you right now that absolutely inspires buyers. And like I said, it's so efficient for you. You just go in that one first time, you make that video, and then your future follow-ups are just on Zooms. Now they've seen inside the business. They've had a chance to talk to the seller directly. How efficient is that? and it's not only efficient, it's effective. So like I said, this sort of, I started doing this not long ago myself, and I did it for a business that was, like an hour away from my office. And I did it sort of as a way so I don't have to keep bringing people into this business, and to make it easy for myself. And then COVID hit, and it's like, I just do it for everything now. It is just so wonderful. I cannot recommend it highly enough. But anyway, like I said, you just upload it to YouTube and you share a link, and you'll see how well that works for you. If you get nothing else out of this meeting, get that. Okay. All right, next. Seller equals 10 times the broker. Okay. So in this meeting with the seller, what the seller says is important. We all know this, right? We're salespeople, and it doesn't mean the buyers necessarily distrust us. But if we say it, let's face it, it's a little bit more of a grain of salt than if the seller says it. If the seller says it and says it convincingly, that means so much more. It's so much more impactful. So the buyer needs to hear things from the seller, and you have to tell the seller, if you don't toot your own horn, no one will do it for you. And they need to be able to, speak positively and strongly about the great things about their business. And I tell them, being a little boastful, and I put here in parentheses, and I'll explain that in a second, about the business is okay. Some sellers are very humble, and they're afraid to speak well of themselves or their business. And you got to let them know that's okay to do. Okay. This is no time to be humble. And again, I write about the business. We're going to talk about that right now. Or in a second. So positives and negatives. Okay, remind the seller that the buyer likes the business and is interested in buying it. If they weren't interested in it, they wouldn't be wasting their time. And the goal is to make sure that the buyer still wants to buy it after the meeting ends, right? If they didn't like the business, they wouldn't be wasting their time here. So it's important that they know they like it at the beginning of the meeting. Your job is to make sure they still like it at the end of that meeting. Okay, so you got to focus on the positive and what makes the business so successful. Okay, and if there's a negative, and this is really important, say it and then flip it to the positive. What do we mean by that? First of all, no business is perfect. All businesses have problems, and sometimes you're just forced to say something that isn't very nice about the business, okay? Because the buyer sort of drags it out of you. But if you've got to say something negative, think of some way to flip it to the positive. And a good example would be, let's say the seller doesn't know anything about, social media or Google AdWords or advertising online, the products, and they can say, yeah, that's the negative. But the positive is, you know about this stuff and I don't, so you'll be able to use social media. You'll be able to use better search engine optimization. You'll be able to use Google AdWords to increase the sales of the business, right? So you start with the negative and you got to flip it to the positive. You got to tell the seller that and explain it. They'll get it. Most sellers of businesses are salesmen themselves. Okay, so avoid the negatives. No business is perfect. All businesses have problems and are imperfect. Something negative happened in the past has no material relevance to the future. It doesn't need to be mentioned. Okay. And like, so a seller saying, talking about an employee that used to steal. I mean, they don't work there anymore. Why are we talking about this? It's not relevant. Don't talk about the negatives, talk about the positives. And I sometimes will say, picture yourself as a car salesman. You bring a customer to buy a car into a parking lot, for the business. And you're looking at the car, you wouldn't expect the salesman to say, yeah, this model has been known to break down on the side of the road quite a bit. You wouldn't hear that, right? So in the same way, just focus on the positive. If there's something that's, materially significant, that sometimes you do have to disclose some negatives, right? And I'm not saying don't disclose those things, but negatives that are irrelevant to the seller going forward once they own the business simply don't need to be mentioned in this meeting. They have no place. Okay. Now I'm going to show you something a little funny here. Okay. Oh, we missed. Oh, it's not here. Oh, it's not here. Okay. So why didn't it come up here? Hold on. All right. Okay. I'm going to skip this slide. I put it in the wrong place. I swear to God, this just happened to me 2 weeks ago. So I added this to the presentation. This is an actual question that came from one of my buyers after the seller meeting. This is the follow-up question. You ready? Reading this? My seller, this is I'll tell you, this is a sweeping business, parking lot sweeping company. And he's a nice guy and everything, but he's really bad at talking to buyers. And he's an older fellow, retired, and he thinks of himself as being the old seer of the parking lot sweeping industry, and he's got to tell them everything. And he basically literally in the middle of the meeting said, you can't go after those accounts because you'll get a busted kneecap from one of your competitors. I swear to God, this just happened to me.
What was the answer?
Well, he claimed that he was making a joke about, New Jersey and the mafia or something. I don't think he was. So that's how we responded, and the buyer took it. It's ridiculous anyway. I mean, I don't know why I would say that. So anyway, I just want to throw up that funny comment that just came recently. I've added it to my presentation. All right, so let's go. Next thing is an agenda. So we send an agenda to the participants prior to the meeting. Okay, and so what is in that agenda? So my current agenda, actually, can I bring it up here? That'll be hard for me to do. It's a 3-part agenda for me. The first part is it has the Zoom link, right? To go into the meeting. The second one is, sorry, I'm going from memory here. The second one is the do's and don'ts for the buyer. Okay, and I'm going to go over those with you in a little bit. Okay, because I do send, I prep the buyer for the meeting as well, not just the seller. Okay, prep the buyer. So the buyer gets a list of do's and don'ts. And then the third part is like the agenda. And the most important part of the agenda is limiting the time of the meeting. In my agenda, it says the meeting time is expected to last from 30 minutes to 1 hour. And I don't know about you, but I've had buyers, online, you can get lists of questions to ask sellers if you're thinking of buying a business. And it's like 60 questions long, and they think someone is going to sit there for 3 hours with them over all these, ridiculous questions that may or may not have any relevance. So I set the standard right ahead of time, 30 minutes to 1 hour for this meeting. Okay. But anyway, the agenda has tour of the business, telling everyone about their background, buyer asking prepared questions of the seller and buyer have the opportunity to have their own agenda items. And I set the expectation. Here it says 1.5, but I now use 1 hour. I say 30 minutes to 1 hour. If it goes a little over, no big deal. Okay. Okay, next. So I always start the sit-down meeting by asking the buyer to discuss his or her background, why they're interested in buying the business. Seller can use this info to better respond. I think I already mentioned something about that. Here's the next thing I tell the seller, okay? This meeting is not a training session. And sometimes you'll have a seller that tries to go into incredible detail about their business. And it's important that they know not to do that. If they go into too much detail, first of all, the buyer's eyes will just gloss over. They can only take in so much information here. So this is more of just sort of a vague overview of the different aspects of the business. This is not a detail kind of a meeting. And sometimes you get a seller that literally wants to go over, especially if you bring them into the business, they'll start teaching them how to go through some procedure that they do. There's no place in this meeting, and it's important that you tell the seller that. Don't get into too much detail. Focus on the basics. Keep things simple and easy to understand. Okay, the next thing is, all right, it says the slide title is, it's easy, anyone can do it. So I would just say that, it's important that the seller not focus on their own personal strengths and skills. The seller isn't selling themselves, they're selling a business. And if anything, I say this to the sellers, I say, when you go to sell your business, the more you're nothing special, the better. It's the business that makes money, not the owner, right? And if they think the owner is this great guy or woman who has these incredible talents and experience and is the wizard of this industry, they'll always think, how can I be as good as that person? So it's important not to focus on the seller's personal strengths and skills. Don't make the seller think that they can't replace the seller. Don't make the buyer think, excuse me, they can't replace the seller. Don't focus too much on yourself and your special abilities and skills, or the buyer will think they won't be able to do as good a job as the seller. Do explain to the buyer how they'll be able to step in your shoes without disruption to the business. Do explain to the buyer how it's the business that makes the money, not the seller personally. Okay, remember, it's easy, anyone can do it. I know that it's hard sometimes to, that last concept, to apply that to every business, but most businesses, it really is true. Next thing is to help the buyer envision him or herself in your role. And so I tell the seller this, as you're speaking to the buyer, suggest when you're talking to, that you should be saying, okay, Mr. or Mrs. Buyer, when you come in the morning, you will get this ready, then you will do that, and then you will handle this. And so place them into the role of owning the business as the business is discussed, right? Don't just talk about what the seller does. Talk about how the buyer is going to be doing those same tasks, okay? Make them feel like they're already starting the process of buying the business, okay? And the buyers are apprehensive about the challenges. So don't forget, you've got a buyer sitting there. They might be nervous. They may be thinking, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I'm skilled enough to do this, if I have the ability to do it. So it's important that the seller should make the buyer feel confident that the buyer will have the ability to run the business successfully. If they get the impression from the seller that the seller doesn't think they can do it, you're going to lose that buyer immediately, right? Buyer wants to get the impression from the seller that the seller has confidence in them.
Peter,
Yes?
do you offer 30 days free training with most of your business sales?
It just depends on the situation. Normally I say 2 weeks free training because I want to, if the seller is going to stay on, I want them to get paid sooner than that. But sometimes it's a month.
Okay.
Okay, but anyway, so like I said, make that buyer feel comfortable about it. All right, let the buyer feel you have confidence in them. So this is just reiterating the same point. Buyer wants to feel that the seller believes in them. The buyer must be left with the feeling that the seller is supportive of the buyer. Buyer must be made to feel confident in moving forward with an offer. Okay, and there are two really important things you've got to accomplish in this meeting. And the very first one is your competitive advantages. And my suggestion here is, we're going to talk about this real quick, is literally, and the action step is have the seller write this down on an index card. So in the meeting, they can look at it, because some sellers, or you can quiz them ahead of time and make sure they're going to be able to do it by memory. And but they need to be able to define and specify the competitive advantages that the company has that will promote future growth. And I will say to the seller, okay, what are your competitive advantages? This is the prep meeting, right? What are your competitive advantages? And we discuss what they are. They say, okay, now in the meeting, I want you to bring those up. And I will tell you right now, 90% of the time, the seller is not going to bring them up. So during the meeting, you, the broker, have to say to the seller, so Mr. or Mrs. Seller, what are your competitive advantages? And you literally just say it to them. And then, like I said, you've had the meeting ahead of time. They've rehearsed what to say. They're not lying. When I say rehearsed, it just means they're ready to say it. And that's how you're going to get that over to the buyer. Okay. Let them talk about it before the meeting in your training session and make sure they can do it during the meeting, and then remind them when they inevitably forget to bring it up. Okay. All right. So next one, missed opportunities. And like I said, same thing. Go over the missed opportunities with them, discuss what they'll be and what they'll say, tell them to say it during the meeting. They're going to forget to say it in the meeting. And then during the meeting, you, the broker, have to say to the seller, so Mr. and Mrs. Seller, can you tell us what are the missed opportunities in this business that you think the buyer could take advantage of? So by missed opportunities, what do I mean? Well, earlier I gave that advertising example, right? So you've got an old school seller who doesn't know how to do anything online. They don't know how to do Google AdWords or search engine optimization or social media advertising. So that's a missed opportunity, right? But you got this new young buyer in that knows how to do all that stuff. and they'll be able to do a better job than the seller. So that's a missed opportunity is a bonus to the buyer, right? They'll be able to take the same business, but do better by taking advantage of those missed opportunities, right? And I tell them, I said, being self-deprecating is good. It's okay to criticize yourself. Don't be too proud in this meeting, right? Flip the missed opportunities to the positive, okay? So again, action step, have them write down the missed opportunities on that index card. You'll see, it'll make it easier for them to remember, because I find that even if I go over what these missed opportunities are, and then in the meeting, like I said, they forget to say it, I say to them, what are the missed opportunities? They usually won't think of them all. So it's really good if they can write them down and have them in front of themselves. Okay. Next. Again, okay, now personal, right? So when the reason for selling a business, and I know you must all know this, it's always a personal reason. You're never selling for a business reason. What's a good business reason to sell? You think the business is doing the best it'll ever do and the future is not going to be as bright, so you sell? Or you can't make money in this business, or there's a new competitor moving in. There's never a good business reason to sell if it's a good business, right? Okay, it's always a personal reason. And just like down in Georgia, I'm sure it's the same up here. Most of my sellers are retirees. And, you know, we have the, you know, as we know, the baby boomers started retiring big time, I think starting in 2011. And that's still going on, obviously. And so that's the best reason, but they may be moving up here. Everybody moves to Florida. They're either retiring or they're moving to Florida. Okay, you got to know that personal reason. You got to make sure the seller knows how to talk about that personal reason in the meeting. Okay, no negotiating. And this is in my list of things I give to the buyer. I tell them you cannot negotiate in this meeting. Our job as the broker, we're supposed to be the buffer for the seller, right? If the buyer in that meeting, let's say you got a business that's listed at $400,000, and the buyer can say to the seller, would you take 300, right? Then all of a sudden they can look at the seller and look at their body language, and the seller's at a disadvantage. Anytime the buyer can negotiate directly with the seller's at a disadvantage and the buyer is at an advantage, right? And it's important that you tell the buyer ahead of time, do not negotiate in this meeting. So in that list you're going to give to your buyer, that's in the list. Please do not negotiate anything during the meeting. And then I also tell my seller during my coaching session with the seller, I say, if the buyer tries to negotiate with you, just use the 3 magic words. I say, talk to Peter. Talk to Peter. That's what you say. Don't let them, tell them not to negotiate, right? Right at the bottom here, talk to Peter. Okay, I also tell the seller, let me interrupt. Okay, so it depends on the seller and what they're like, but first of all, sometimes, like I said, there's a misunderstanding. I think a buyer asked a question. I don't think it was answered properly. I want the seller to be able to hear from me, so I interrupt them, and I need them to let me interrupt. And then after I'm done talking, the seller has to validate my statement. So if the seller's talking and I interrupt and say, oh, I think, don't forget such and such and such. And then the seller just like looks at me and then just keeps saying what they were saying before. That means they disagree with what I just said. They must validate it. They have to say, yeah, what Peter said is right. And then justify why what I said was right. So that's important. They have to validate the broker's statement. Otherwise, they'll think that they disagree with what I just interrupted with. Okay. No business cards. Tell the seller ahead of time. Do not exchange business cards with your buyer. A seller hands a business card to a buyer, that's permission for the buyer to call the seller directly. I don't know about you, but I control my deals. Listen, I deal with some brokers. I talk to them and they say they're okay if the buyer calls the seller. I'm not okay with that. They must go through me. If all of a sudden they start talking to each other, I lose control of my deal. I don't know what the problems are. I don't know what the issues are. And the next thing I know, my deal is dead and I don't even know why. If there's a problem, I want to know what that problem is so I can solve the problem. Isn't that my job? Isn't that why I'm being hired to sell this business? So, Tell the seller if they ask you for their contact information, politely decline and ask the buyer to contact the broker for any questions. Broker doesn't want to be out of the loop and therefore unable to resolve problems as they arise. Okay. And then my last thing I say to the seller, I say, listen, after all these things, I've gone through this whole list with them. I say, listen, no one's perfect. Okay. Everyone has their own style. Just do your best, stay positive, be yourself. You'll be fine. Like I said, be patient with your seller. No one's perfect. And like I said, I'm writing down those notes, right, on my computer during the meeting. So afterwards, I can politely say to the seller, by the way, you said this, you said that, maybe you shouldn't have phrased it that way, or you could have also have mentioned this. So that's how you deal with that. You don't get frustrated at your seller. Okay, so buyer management, I'm going to go through this real quick, okay? So again, I say to them the following things. I'd like your personal cell phone number, okay? So that if, whatever, I have an issue meeting them at the business or they're late or something, I want to make sure I can contact them. I tell them, we usually start with the buyer telling us about their background during the meeting. Feel free to ask any questions you want about the business. It's helpful if you bring a list of questions with you. And I say to them, by the way, if you can share that list with us prior to the meeting, that's helpful. And it's good because you can give them to the seller and if they need to find answers, they can be, equipped and ready to answer those questions if need be. Okay. Tell the seller why you want to buy the business. We've already talked about these things. Don't negotiate any of the purchase terms at the meeting. Do not exchange any contact information with the seller. Let me know if you have any concerns about the meeting before or after, and I will assist you in any way I can. And then afterwards, by the way, always send a thank you note to the buyer. Sometimes I'm negligent on this. I forget to do it, but it's a really good thing to do. Right after the meeting, send them a note showing them that you appreciate them being at the meeting. And then you could send one to the seller too and say, by the way, you did a good job in that meeting. All right. Okay. Sometimes people have tips of their own, but anyway, that's the end of my presentation here. So we got a few minutes here. I don't know if there's any questions. Should I stop my share? I'll
Sure.
stop the share.
Peter, several people have asked me if you would make available the.
I'll give it out. Sure.
Okay.
Any questions though, or it's a lot of stuff to digest, I know, but hopefully you got something out of it.
I thought it was fantastic.
Yeah, fantastic.
Covered a lot of ground in great detail, and I think a lot of helpful hints. Really, really helpful. Thank you.
Like I said, if you just get a handful of good nuggets out of it, you've done well for yourself today, and the hour you spent was well worth it.
Oh yeah, that was awesome, Peter. Yeah.
Peter, this is Matt Walkley. We met briefly in Florida a couple of years ago after you presented this to the IBBA.
Oh, okay. Wave your hand so I can see where you are.
Oh, here I am.
Oh, I got you. Okay.
Okay. And I just want to say that it was fantastic. Thank you so much for doing this. And good luck with your golf game today, too.
I shot 2 over par at a simulator last week, so I'm feeling good.
Really? Wow.
I'm not that good a golfer, though, so outside, I'm a different guy.
Okay, us Georgians, everybody send him some Masters vibes, okay? So send him,
Yeah.
our azaleas are blooming,
The pine pollen. Brian, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was just going to ask Peter. We have a banker, Beth Shea, that's active in the New
Oh,
England.
I know
Business
Beth Shea
Brokers.
really well.
And she's a fantastic SBA banker and does a lot of our business acquisition activities. So I'm glad that you know Beth.
Oh, great. Yeah, no, she's fantastic. And we've had her as a speaker in our organization. And I think they're a sponsor of NEBBA as well. I'd say, yes, they are.
Yep. Good.
So Peter also wanted us to me to give him some tips on meetings that he could have up in New England. So if anybody's got any suggestions for Peter, yeah. But that was an awesome presentation.
Okay. Any other questions? Just raise your hand or whatever, or maybe that's about it. Okay, Michael, I think is trying to.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Michael.
Great presentation, Peter. Really enjoyed it. I was curious if you had maybe any observations or trends that you've started to see emerge as the pandemic has perhaps started to subside a bit, or what are you seeing? I'm just curious.
Well, I think that we're getting the businesses. Yesterday, I was at a local business owner has 2 Italian restaurants. So now that we're coming out of COVID, I think you're going to see a lot more restaurant sale activity. Up to now, the pizza shops and so forth have been quite saleable because they've done really well. But the higher end restaurants have struggled. And I think you're going to see a lot more of those come online to sell. But I'd say that's all I can think of. It's really the businesses that have done well in spite of COVID have just been the ones, and I'm sure you've experienced the same thing down there. And I don't know if you've been affected in Georgia the way we have in Massachusetts. We were one of the first lockdown states. And so it really impacted us up here in Massachusetts quite a bit early on.
We like to pretend it didn't.
By the way, I want to say that my stepmother is from, have you heard of Dawson, Georgia, which is in southwestern Georgia? Anyone? Okay,
Yeah,
I
like
got family
Dawsonville.
there.
Yeah.
No, I've heard of it.
There we go.
Way down in the corner, I think. Okay.
I think Mark Jones has a question.
Okay, where's Mark Jones?
I'm right
Raise your
here.
hand. Okay. got
Hold
it.
on. Do you see me? Yeah, I got my camera off because I'm in another area, but
That's okay.
appreciate the presentation. It was very good. What is that software that you mentioned before? Microsoft.
Okay, so I have Microsoft Office 365. So it's the full Office professional, whatever. And it has there's a utility right in there called Video Editor.
Video editor. Okay.
Right. So what you do is I use an iPhone, so it saves all my pictures into iCloud. Then I just download the videos into my computer. I grab them I import them into Video Editor, and you'll see you can place them in the right order on, if you do multiple clips. I try to do it with one shot if I can. And it works really well. And then you just finish the video, it turns the whole thing into an MP4, and then just you don't know it. If you have a Google account, you just set up your YouTube account if you don't already have one. And you can just upload them into your YouTube account, and then you simply set the privacy on them. So you don't want them to be public, obviously, because your listings are confidential.
Yes,
and then
sir.
you can just send a link. It'll give you a link. You just send a link to your buyers, and then right off the bat, you bring them right into that business.
Understood. Thank you so much.
Okay. Anybody else? I think that's it. Which means I can go play golf now.
Watch your kneecaps, okay?
All right, watch my kneecaps. I'm saying, one thing about being a business broker, you can play golf whenever you want to.
Right.
And for the golfers out there in this crowd, we know that. You just block off the time. Okay, is that it?
Thanks, yeah.
Thank you, Peter. That was an excellent presentation. I'm sure everybody learned something.
Okay, my pleasure.
Thank you.
Right, thank you.
Okay, everybody, I'm going to go now.
All right.
Bye.
Okay, goodbye.
Bye.
Our next meeting next month is actually not going to be a meeting. It's going to be a conference. We have a meeting in, April 13th. We have a 3-hour class, introduction to sell-side business brokering, and then in the 2 weeks we have buy-side business brokering. It's all listed on our website. These are classes that will get you, if you get there on time and do everything you're supposed to, you can get 3 hours of credit towards your real estate license, or you can get credit towards board certified broker program. So we hope everybody will do that. Anything else you want to say, Judy?
Does anybody have any questions? Is there anything additional anybody wants to tell us?
Well, I wanted to say, I'm hearing that somebody else maybe in here can say something more to this, but I'm hearing that Dean's doing great. Dean's feeling better. He's on vacation and he's helping somebody clear a bicycle trail this morning. So that's great news about
true?
Dean. Yeah. Who's there from Dean's brokerage?
Brian? Brian Judson?
Is Brian still here?
I am, I work with Dean, Keith
Yeah.
Turner. Yeah, he's, still need to be praying for him and praying for his family. It's a tough thing he's been going through, but, he's got great spirits. As those of you know him, he's in great spirits, and, just continue to keep him in your prayers.
Okay,
Wow, that's
that's
terrific.
good. That's really good to hear.
That
Yeah.
is good to hear.
Yeah.
So, okay, well, we will see you all in a couple of weeks, I hope.
You just watch your emails, and if you're not a member, please join. If your membership has lapsed, please renew. And
Yeah,
everybody stay healthy.
yes, that too. And
2
board members,
vaccines.
we will
2
see you in about
vaccines.
5 minutes.
Okay, you get bored. 5 minutes, or 5 minutes. You want to start at 11, 11:15? What do you want to start at?
11:15.
Okay, board
Okay,
meeting at 11:15. Okay,
great. Thank you, everyone.
all right, thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.